Okay everyone, so now that we've got all the maps that we need, let's go and let's export them into CryEngine 3. So what I'm going to do is I'll go to File, Save As, and then I'll simply navigate to the CryEngine 3 folder. I'll go to Game, and then Objects, which by default you won't find inside CryEngine 3 folder, so you will have to create it. Then I'll go to 3D Motive Industrial.texture folder, which I also made. And finally I'll choose CryTIFF plugin from the format list. Now, in order to see this format on your list, you will need to install the CryTIFF plugin that is distributed along with the CryEngine 3 SDK or CryEngine 2 Mod SDK. I won't be explaining how to get this plugin installed, but you will find a link to the official CryEngine 3 documentation page in the references section under this video on 3D Motive's website. Now here, I'm gonna go and rename this file, and instead of calling it industrial.diffuse, I'll use naming convention that is used in CryEngine 3. So I'll call this industrial.diff. Okay, now let's click Save, and you will see that this menu will pop up. And basically, here we have to change a few parameters. I'll go and change this to diffuse high quality. And now, by default, CryEngine 3 will attempt to size down all textures bigger than 512 by 512. So we have to change that as well. I will simply click here on the PC section, and then I'll click High Resolution. And this will export our texture at 1024 by 1024. Now let's click OK, and now our diffuse is done. Now let's do the same with our normal map. So I'll go to File, Save As, navigate to the CryEngine 3, Objects, 3D Motive Industrial.texture folder, and once again I'll use CryTIFF plugin. And here, instead of calling it normal map, we'll call it industrial.ddn. Okay, now in this menu, I'll change it to normal map high quality, and once again I'll go and change the resolution in the PC section. Now let's go and let's do the same thing with the specular map. So once again I'll go to Save As and navigate to our folder. And I'll call this industrial.spec, which is once again a naming convention used in CryEngine. And here I'll go with specular high quality, increase the resolution, and click OK. Alright, so now we are done with exporting our textures, so we can hop into CryEngine and we can set up our material. Okay, so now we can start putting everything together. So what we have to do is we have to go and open a sample map that I made. So I'll go to File, Open, and here in the levels you will see that I've got this 3D Motive Industrial.texture folder. And later on you'll find a finished version of this map in your project files, and you'll simply have to copy it into CryEngine 3 game levels directory. Okay, so now I'll go and open this 3D Motive Industrial.texture cry file, and basically this is the empty map that I made. And in a second you'll see that this map is very simple. All we have here is just a single solid mesh, and it's just a box that we'll use to display our material. And also we have this gray background, so there's nothing really fancy going on. Okay, so now let's go and let's open the material editor by pressing the M key. And in this menu, I will simply right click in this empty space here and click Add New Material. Now here we have to go and find a location for this material, so I'll go to Objects, 3D Motive Industrial.texture, and I'll simply go and call this material Industrial.do. And press Enter. Okay, now let's go and let's apply it. So I will go and select this solid mesh, and then right click here and choose Assign to Selected Objects. And as you can see right now we have this red texture, and that's because we don't have any maps plugged into our material, so we have to change that. So I'll move this material window, and here we've got a bunch of parameters, but we're going to leave most of them for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to plug our maps. So I'll scroll down here, and I'll simply go and click on this button next to diffuse, and I'll navigate to our Objects, 3D Motive Industrial.texture folder, and I'll choose this industrial.diff file. Okay, now we can see our diffuse, but as you can see it's way too bright, so we have to change that. So I'll go and scroll up this menu, and here we've got this diffuse color option, so I'll go and click it. And I'll simply go and drag this slider down to something like maybe 100. That will work. generally when you import your textures into CryEngine, they will be a bit too bright, so we'll have to darken them slightly. Now with this menu we can also go and change the color to something completely different, like blue, green, or anything else, so this gives you quite a lot of flexibility. But let's leave it at gray, and I'll go and close this. And now I'll go and load our normal map, so you have to click this button next to the bump map. And I'll simply go and load this nDo2 ddn TIFF file. Okay, and now as you can see, we've got our normal map, and it seems to work quite well. It's not as strong as in nDo, mostly because the ambient lighting is working. But yeah, right now it obviously looks a bit too flat, so we have to give it some specular highlights. So I'll go and open this specular color menu, and I'll simply increase the slider. And now as you can see, because we don't have any specular map, our specular highlights are way too strong and they don't seem to follow our texture too well. But if we go and increase the glossiness to something really high, we will start to get this really nice and sharp fall off. But yeah, obviously the result is way too strong, so we still need to use our specular map. So I'll go to the specular section, and I'll simply go and choose our nDo2 spec file. And now as you can see, finally our specular has a lot of difference. So it seems like there's much more brightness on the glass, and the highlights on the grey paint are much weaker. Our red paint seems to be slightly metallic, and it has those slightly red highlights. So it seems that all we did in the previous chapter turned out pretty well. But if you would like to tweak your specular a bit more, there is a really easy way to do this. The easiest way to preview your specular map is to go to the diffuse color and then simply drop it down all the way to 0. And then you can pretty much view your specular on its own. So as you can see, it really does seem to work. But yeah, I think this will do just fine for now. So I will go and put the diffuse color back to 100. Okay. And at this point, you could pretty much finish with your texture. It doesn't seem to look so bad, but there's way more that we can achieve. So what we can do is we can go and add some proper reflections to our material. We're going to do that by using cube maps. Now, if this was a normal level, you would probably have to use an environment probe actor, but because this scene is pretty much empty, we'll just use a pre-made cube map. So I'll go here, scroll down and find the environment section. Now simply go and load one of the cube maps that are already distributed along with CryEngine 3 SDK. So if I go to Textures, Cube Maps, and then to Forest, you will see that there's a bunch of cube maps from the Forest demo level. And I'll simply go with this one, Cube Map Forest BCM DDS. So let's open it. Okay, and now as you can see, we can't really see the difference. So we have to go and we have to enable the cube map. So I'll go to this Shader Generation Params section and I'll open it. And here we've got a bunch of different options that you can enable for this material, but we'll ignore most of them. I'll go and use the environment map. And now as you can see, this environment map gives a bit of color to our specular highlights. And that alone makes the result a bit more realistic. However, we want those reflections to be more sharp, so I'll go up there. And I'll go and increase the glossiness to the maximum. And now as you can see, those reflections are really sharp. And our door looks like it's completely wet or like it's totally made of glass. So we have to make that effect much weaker. So I'll go and move this window, and if we scroll down to the bottom, we've got a bunch of options like Fresnel bias, Fresnel power, and so on. So here I'm gonna go and reduce the Fresnel bias to something like 0.2, and as you can see, this makes the reflections a lot more supple. However, the reflections on the paint are still way too strong, and reducing them further would make the glass reflections worse. So in this case, you might want to define the glossiness of different elements of your texture separately using a gloss map. Now, while making a gloss map is quite easy, proper material definition is a very deep topic, and we won't be tackling it in this tutorial. However, with CryEngine 3 we can derive a very quick gloss map from the specular map of our door. So if I go and set this gloss channel B option to 1, you will see that we only get the reflections on the glass. And the reflections on the door panels become quite dull and they just look very boring. But what we can do is we can go and reduce this slider a bit. So we go and drag it to maybe 0.5. And now, as you can see, we've got a very nice balance between the reflections on the glass and the reflections on the door. Now finally, let's also go and let's maybe make those highlights slightly weaker. So I'll go and change this Fresnel scale to 0.25, and as you can see, they become a bit more supple. Okay, so at this point we have almost everything that we need. And as you can see, we've got some very nice highlights in there, which are not too strong. And the glass seemed to work quite fine as well. And if you zoom in, you can see that because we have generated those normal details from our diffuse, we've got some very nice supple noise that makes it look like this surface had been actually painted. But I think this texture looks a little bit too clean right now. Especially this glass seems way too even. So what we can do is we can go and add some detail maps to our texture. So if I go here and click on this button next to detail, we can go and we can load a detail bump map. So if I go and find the textures folder, then I will go to detail bump mapping. We've got a bunch of pre-made bump maps that you can find in CryEngine 3 SDK. So here I'm going to go with this metal DDN DDS. And when we load it, you can see that we've got this very nasty looking material, which is basically covered with this kind of yellow texture. But we can fix that very easily. We just have to go down to the shader generation params, and we have to enable the detail mapping option. Okay. And now, as you can see, the result is very strong and noisy. But here we've got a bunch of parameters that can tweak the results. So if I go and change the detail tiling to maybe 8, you will see that the noise becomes a lot smaller and starts to distort the reflections. But I think the noise is still a bit too big, so maybe let's try a higher value like 12. Okay, that seems to work actually. And now, if I go and reduce the detail bump scale to maybe 0.5, you can see that the noise becomes slightly weaker. And if I go to reduce it further, we will start to get this very supple distortion on our texture. And basically both the glass and the paint have those micro bumps that seem to make the reflections look more realistic. Now maybe let's drop it down to 0.15. And yeah, I think I'll leave it like this. It actually seems to work quite nicely. And basically this supple noise gives us this little something and makes our paint look more like real paint and makes the glass look dirty and distorted. Okay, so at this point we are done with this material, so we'll go and close the editor. And now we can preview our final result. So, as you can see, you can get some pretty decent results using only nDo2 and Photoshop. You don't have to create hyper meshes to create hard surface materials, and in fact these techniques can be used for all types of materials, given that you step back and think about the most efficient way to apply these techniques to the material type you're working on. Now, to give you an even better idea of what can be achieved with this workflow, I will skip ahead and show you a more complex version of this door and summarize everything that we learned thus far.